5 years. Can you believe it? It's been half a decade since the COVID-19 pandemic really, started to change everything.
Yeah, it's pretty wild when you think about it.
And it feels like in the aftermath, everybody's been trying to make sense of it all. Like we see it in all these academic journals and policy discussions. Everyone's trying to analyze what happened.
Absolutely. And I think this is a particularly important time for our listeners to be thinking about this too.
Right. Especially when you're looking at things like governance and the way societies function. I mean, this pandemic, it touched every single aspect of life. It's impossible to ignore the lessons it taught us. You know what I mean?
It's not even just about looking back,
Yeah.
right? It's about using those lessons to build a better future, a more resilient future,
Yeah. Okay.
more inclusive one, right? And hopefully one that's even more innovative.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Have we actually learned from all of this, or are we kind of missing the point still?
That's exactly what we're going to try to unpack today.
Right, exactly. And to do that, we've been taking a really deep dive into a whole bunch of different sources. We've got reflections from people who lived through it, discussions on how policies were made, and analyses from academics trying to understand it all.
All that good stuff.
Right. And our main goal here is to pull out those really crucial lessons, those things that we absolutely need to remember, like what were the biggest vulnerabilities that this whole thing exposed, and what do we need to focus on going forward?
Exactly. We want to know where the weak points were so we can prevent the same problems from happening again.
Right, we got to be prepared.
Good.
So maybe a good place to start is just by taking a step back and looking at some of those really critical insights that emerged during the pandemic.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, let's kick things off with something that, honestly, we might take for granted: public trust. Specifically, the trust people have in healthcare systems and those big institutions that are supposed to take care of us. Because think about it, when a new and scary virus is spreading like wildfire, everything hinges on people believing what they're being told.
Exactly. People need to trust that the information they're getting about vaccines or masks or anything else is accurate and reliable.
Exactly. If people don't trust the message, it doesn't matter how good the science is behind it.
Right. It's like having the best car in the world, but no gas in the tank. It's not going anywhere.
Perfect analogy. And one of the really kind of alarming things that the pandemic showed us was just how shaky that trust really was in a lot of places.
Yeah, and in many places it still is. It was like a global trend almost.
It's true. And it wasn't just like a feeling, like we saw real world consequences because of this lack of trust. Take India, for example. Early on, there was a lot of evidence that infection numbers were being underreported.
Right, and there was also a lot of excess mortality that wasn't being acknowledged.
Exactly. And when you combine those things, what you get is this perception that the system, the government, wasn't being transparent. And that lack of transparency really eroded public confidence right at the time when it was needed the most.
And what's interesting is this wasn't just an isolated incident.
Right. It was a pattern.
We saw similar things happen in other countries too, especially ones that were already struggling economically. It almost seemed like even small communication mistakes, even if they were unintentional, just added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, it's like one little spark can ignite this huge blaze of misinformation and distrust, and then it becomes really hard to put it out.
It really highlights how important the communication aspect is. It's not just about what you say, but how you say it. It's about honesty, about building trust, and about the relationship that already exists between the public and the government.
So for our listeners who are, really digging into how governance works, the key takeaway here is that communication and transparency are not just nice to haves. They're absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
You need to have that strong foundation of trust if you want to effectively handle any kind of public health crisis.
It really is the bedrock.
So true. So let's switch gears for a second and talk about another area that was hugely impacted by the pandemic.
Yeah?
Technology.
Yeah, technology definitely played a huge role, both good and bad. It was like a double-edged sword, really.
Absolutely. On the one hand, it felt like we couldn't have gotten through it without technology, and there's some really exciting things that came out of this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, think about pharmaceutical research. Artificial intelligence, or AI, played this enormous role in speeding up the whole process of discovering and developing new drugs. I mean, we even saw a big spike in AI-related patents after the pandemic started.
It was like a boom. All of a sudden, everyone realized just how powerful AI could be for this kind of research.
Exactly. And a really good example of this, something that made headlines all over the world, was DeepMind's AlphaFold. Have you heard about
Oh
this?
yeah, that was a huge breakthrough.
It really was. They made these incredible advances in predicting the structures of proteins, and that's super important for understanding how diseases work and potentially even how to treat them.
Yeah, it opened up a whole new world of possibilities for biomedical science.
It's amazing to think about. And we also saw this incredible expansion of telemedicine, which was a lifesaver for so many people.
Absolutely. When you couldn't see a doctor in person, telemedicine allowed people to still get the care they needed.
It was so important for maintaining that continuity of care. But here's the flip side, and it's a big one: the digital divide.
Yeah, that was definitely a major issue.
Not everyone has equal access to technology, and that really became clear during the pandemic. I mean, a lot of people, especially in the global south, were basically left behind because they didn't have the digital tools they needed.
Right. And it wasn't just an inconvenience, it actually made existing inequalities even worse.
Yeah, for people who were already marginalized, this lack of access was a huge problem. So I guess what this shows us is that technology is incredibly powerful, but it's not a magic solution.
It's definitely not a cure-all. And if we don't make sure everyone has equal access to technology, we're just going to end up with even bigger divisions in society.
Exactly. So moving on, another big theme that emerged from the pandemic was this idea of existing inequalities being magnified. It wasn't like the pandemic created brand new forms of inequality, but it definitely put a spotlight on the ones that were already there.
It was like it took those inequalities and amplified them, like turning up the volume on a speaker.
Such a good way to put it. And one of the clearest examples of this was the impact on women. I mean, across the board, women really bore the brunt of the pandemic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they ended up shouldering so much more responsibility.
Absolutely. They were more likely to be taking care of kids, they were more likely to lose their jobs in certain industries, and they were disproportionately affected by the mental health crisis that came along with the pandemic. It was almost like society put all this pressure on these pre-existing fault lines and they just cracked even further.
And we saw similar things happen when it came to access to healthcare. For marginalized communities, especially in places where resources were already scarce, getting even basic healthcare became much harder. It's like all the existing barriers they faced just got even higher.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And on a global scale, the pandemic was a huge setback for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is all about achieving more equality around the world.
Yeah, it really set us back in terms of making progress on those goals.
And then there's the silent pandemic that you mentioned earlier, the mental health crisis.
Oh, right. That was a major issue, too.
Our sources talk about how this really exposed just how weak mental health support systems are all over the world. And it wasn't just about the immediate stress of the pandemic, but also this underlying neglect of mental health as part of overall healthcare.
It really brought to light how little attention we've been paying to mental well-being.
And it's not just healthcare that was impacted, right? Even the way we work went through a massive shift.
Oh, absolutely. And that's still playing out today.
Mhm.
I mean, think about all the debates we're having about working from home, hybrid models, and just in general, how to keep employees happy and productive.
Yeah, it's like the pandemic forced us to completely rethink the way we work, and we're still figuring out what the best approach is.
Absolutely. And it's just another example of how these global events can have ripple effects across every aspect of our lives.
So true. So, looking ahead, where do we go from here? What are the big things we need to focus on to make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes and to actually build that more resilient future we keep talking about?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to address those systemic weaknesses, those gaps that the pandemic exposed. It was like COVID-19 shined a giant spotlight on all the vulnerabilities in our systems, things that we might have been ignoring for too long.
And if you want a clear example of that, just look at what happened in the global south, particularly in a place like India.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
The sources we looked at highlighted things like weak infrastructure, underfunded institutions, and just not enough essential public goods. So when a crisis like this hits, those weaknesses are magnified and the consequences are really devastating.
Right. And that's why achieving universal health coverage is more urgent now than ever before. Too many people simply don't have access to basic health care, and that was a major factor in how badly the pandemic hit certain communities.
And it also showed us how critical it is to invest in things like national oxygen production, those really fundamental resources that we need to respond effectively to a crisis.
Yeah, it might seem basic, But when hospitals are running out of oxygen, the results are tragic. So what are some of the solutions being proposed?
Well, one thing that seems really promising is the development of these hybrid care models. It's basically about combining digital health technology with existing healthcare infrastructure, and it has the potential to really expand access to care, especially in places where resources are limited.
And it could be a really cost-effective way to improve healthcare systems.
Exactly. Another interesting thing that happened during the pandemic was this surge in public-private partnerships. It was great to see that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, it was really encouraging.
But the thing is, a lot of those partnerships have already started to fade away.
Oh, that's worrisome.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if we're losing all that valuable knowledge and momentum.
It's like we're forgetting the lessons we learned.
And then there's the ongoing problem of fragmented health systems. A lot of places still don't have a strong, centralized public health authority, which makes it really hard to coordinate a response to a crisis. It's like trying to run a complex operation without a clear chain of command.
It's definitely a recipe for chaos.
So beyond those practical challenges, the pandemic also reignited some really important debates about fairness and ethics on a global scale.
Oh, absolutely. The way we allocated essential resources like vaccines really brought those issues to the forefront.
Yeah, there's a huge discussion about whether we should waive intellectual property rights on things like vaccines, diagnostics, and treatments.
Right. It was a really complex issue with strong arguments on both sides.
It really highlighted the tension between protecting commercial interests, which are important for driving innovation, and making sure that everyone has access to life-saving tools, regardless of where they live or how much money they have.
It was a classic case of individual versus collective good.
And the impact of those decisions was really stark. For example, the African continent was significantly behind in the global vaccine rollout. This whole idea of vaccine nationalism, where wealthy countries were prioritizing their own citizens, really underscored the need for stronger cooperation between countries in the global south. They need to be able to rely on each other and build up their own resilience.
That's so important. They can't be left dependent on the whims of wealthier nations.
It's about finding that balance between encouraging innovation and making sure the benefits of that innovation reach everyone.
Exactly. And I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is that we need to seriously rethink how we approach global health governance. The COVID-19 pandemic should be a wake-up call. We need to create international frameworks that are more equitable, more responsive, and ultimately more effective at preventing and responding to future health crises.
We can't just go back to business as usual. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I think it's important to acknowledge that there has been some progress.
Oh, for sure. We've learned a lot, and our systems are hopefully more prepared now than they were before.
We've seen a lot of innovation, and the global economy seems to be recovering. But the question remains, have we truly absorbed those critical lessons that the pandemic so painfully taught us?
Have we really changed the way we think about these issues?
Yeah, are we actually going to use this experience to build a better future? I think that's what it all comes down to.
I agree. Will we embrace this idea of a unified one world, one health approach where we recognize that health security is a global responsibility? Or will we fall back into those old patterns of fragmentation and self-interest?
I think that's the crucial question we all need to be asking ourselves. And for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC exams, these are all essential things to be thinking about.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Absolutely. The pandemic showed us just how interconnected everything is: governance, public policy, international relations, social justice. It's a perfect case study for understanding how a health crisis can have these massive ripple effects across all of society.
It really is. And those connections are so important for both the mains and prelims exams.
So we really want to hear from you, our listeners. What are the biggest lessons that you took away from the pandemic? What are your thoughts on all of this?
Leave a comment and let us know.
And if you haven't already, please take a second to like and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to keep the conversation going.
We're always eager to hear your perspectives.
And just so you know, all of the insights we discussed today are based on the reporting and analysis from The Hindu. It's a great source of information, and we highly recommend checking it out.
It's definitely worth a read.
So 5 years on, it's clear that the pandemic has changed us in profound ways.
And hopefully we'll continue to learn and adapt as we move forward.
Absolutely.
Here's to a healthier, more resilient future for everyone.
We can only hope.